My name is Gabby Santos, and I am the Community Engagement Manager here at the Davis-Phinney Foundation. And I am joined by Debbie Callahan and Lorraine Wilson. Debbie has been living with Parkinson's for a little over 7 years now. She is from the Northeast area of Pennsylvania and has been there for over 38 years at this point. Debbie's also a retired occupational therapist who is a certified hand therapist and actually worked with people with Parkinson's prior to her own Parkinson's diagnosis, amazingly enough. A type of a story that we're hearing more often today. And then we're also joined by Lorraine, and Lorraine Wilson. She's been living with Parkinson's for about 6 years now, living in Texas, and a retired teacher. So both of these lovely ladies on the screen here with me today are really extraordinary at leading efforts in their communities based on what that local need is. And that's kind of what brings us together here today. Debbie, a fierce advocate for what is right and making sure that people are treated the way that is fair and equitable and they deserve to be treated, and has a CAC, a Community Action Committee, that she's been working with to help aid in her work. And Lorraine, wearing all of the hats with us here at the Davis-Phinney Foundation as an ambassador, also a Community Action Committee leader, leading all sorts of different wellness programs within her community and awareness building activities. And you've probably seen her on screen many times before for some different webinars or joy breaks. So thank you both for joining us today. I know your time is so valuable and precious, and we appreciate it that it's spent here with us to share these stories. Just to, I think, reflect on this process, and then I want to invite Lorraine to share how your experience impacted her as this kind of next side is. I just think it's amazing how much you were able to accomplish from having such a terrible experience, having horrible side effects, really not being within your own abilities that you're used to, and losing so much of your independence, to then it was March of 2022 reaching out to us and saying, hey, something needs to happen. I don't want anybody else to go through this. What can we do? Can I work with you? And we were able to post your letter on our blog in July, and we shared it out in our Healthy Parkinson's Communities newsletter. And you've shared your story so many times with so many different people. And I think that you've had such a significant ripple effect, probably far beyond what you've been able to know so far. And with that leading to, I think, a really beautiful moment that we had earlier this year where, or I guess it was at the end of last year, what is time anymore? Where you were sharing your story during one of our online gatherings with other people within the Healthy Parkinson's Communities Initiative, whether they be ambassadors or fellow Community Action Committee leaders. And Lorraine said, hey, you wrote that letter. And so Lorraine, I want to open it up for you to share your experience and kind of how Debbie's letter impacted you, just as an example of what somebody in their community can do when they see Debbie's story. So,
what impressed me about the whole way this unfolded was part of Debbie's humility, saying, well, I didn't know if I was an advocate. I never thought of myself as an advocate, but by being courageous to share, because she didn't want other people to go through it. What a beautiful story of advocacy. It really moved me. And we had just completed a community event, and the chief medical officer from the local health system was at that event. And so I then, read Debbie's story and was able to visit with him and say, we don't want this to happen here. And he goes, you're correct. We don't want this. And that's helped us locally plan events where we can talk to nurses or other persons in the hospital. And not to go back and question, well, do you treat the headache or do you treat the high blood pressure? That's not, it's not that singular, but it's like, what are we treating? What do we know about the meds? And I don't know about other folks, but I happen to use an app on my phone that lists my Parkinson's meds and then allows me to type in anything. If the doctor says, well, let's give you this, I go, let me check. And then I stick in my little word and say, is this spelled correctly? You know how medicines are. And it will tell me if there are interactions or not to be concerned about, and other drugs that might be offered. Now, do I know if it's a perfectly accurate app? No, I don't know, but it's what I tend to use. So, the medical community, because I know so many folks, including Debbie, as an OT, that's medical community. They're humans, they're wonderful persons, and sometimes they're stressed and can find, to deal with things in a certain way. But when it comes to that kind of suffering that was not called for, Debbie, you might want to explain what you told us a little bit about what happened, but you might mention, or maybe I just wasn't listening carefully, but how long did you really have these repercussions after you were given that med?
I would say the first 3 days. I mean, it was slowly getting better, but the first 3 days were really bad. I had a small powder room on the first floor. I would use the bathroom. My husband had to put a kitchen chair in between the toilet and the sink, because if I stood up to wash my hands, I would fall down again from orthostatic intolerance. So that eventually went away. I did go to this, of course, happened close to a weekend, and I followed up with my family doctor, and he said to me, well, that medicine's out of your system by now. But I don't think it was, because it took a lot of days before I take a phone call from my children. And for weeks I didn't feel right at all.
Mm-hmm. So definitely, at least for weeks is what it's sounding like. And I vaguely remember when you had reached out to me March of last year, you said things are still not quite right. Like you were feeling a lot better, but you still felt off. And so I do remember that sticking out in my mind pretty strongly. And I think what really, Lorraine, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and if there's more than one takeaway, but for me, if there's only one takeaway that everybody remembers, it's to befriend, might not be the right word, but know who in your local community, at the hospital system or the medical offices, depends on where you are, who would you speak to try to talk about preventing this from happening? Who is interested in knowing, how do we want our medical community to always act in the best interest of the patient, which we hope they do. But, again, it's hard.
I had another doctor say to me, you could ask for the pharmacist to clear the medication for you.
Excellent.
At that point, if you're in the ER or as a patient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there are a few things that were said, and before we continue to dig in further, there's one moment that I do want to reflect a little further on from when we were talking to the staff from Geisinger, because that felt like such an important moment for this, that you reached out so many times, you followed up, you sent an email, you'd followed up with an email, I think you had a couple voice messages that you sent, and it wasn't a simple, I reached out, I immediately got a response and I was heard. It was this constant persistence of you begging to be heard for the sake of other people as well. And then when we finally got into that space, it was really reassuring to hear the people on the screen say, hey, we checked into the system, we noticed that this is where it was lacking, but there was still that missing piece of what's next, as you said, which is what we're still trying to figure out with them. Okay, but what is going to happen to make sure that other people, whether they have Parkinson's or not, are not going to encounter a contradictory medication that could have quote unquote been easily avoided. And so I thought that was a really important moment. And so before we start to kind of dig into this, we talked a lot about systems. So before we really dig into the systemic side of this, I'm wondering if there was anything else that you wanted to add or reflect on, or if that felt good.
Well, I think when we had the meeting with the big chief of emergency medicine, and there was a systems guy there, I kind of felt intimidated. Who am I? I'm little Debbie, and there's these people in charge. And I wasn't a normal feisty self-will thing like, well, how are we going to know there's change? That's what, in retrospect, I would have said that at the meeting. Now it just says a follow-up letter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. All of a sudden.
Yeah, I love that. And I think about that often, how you reflected and you said, oh, I was kind of intimidated in that moment. And I think the reality is, both for us looking back on that situation, but then also for anybody else who might be looking to consider how they can influence the medical systems within their community, is actually we're all humans. We all are, and we're all doing our best, and we all can continuously find ways to improve ourselves. And that doesn't mean that every interaction is going to be perfect, or, leave that meeting where you felt intimidated and say, oh yeah, I really gave it to them. Like, it's okay. We're doing our best at every step, and every little moment has an influence. And so I thought that felt really important. So thank you, Debbie.
When I was taking rock steady boxing in Northeast PA, my instructor recently from that wrote me, and she said, "You're a tiger, Debbie." That made me feel better.
Follow that up. We'll have to get you some kind of tiger memorabilia, something, so you can remember how fierce and influential you are. Well, and I think also, Lorraine, you had mentioned, everyone's doing their best. And I think we all are, and everyone, even within the medical system, is. And we often see these moments in so many different communities where something could have been better. Somebody was given a treatment that was not aligned with their needs, like Debbie, or a decision was made that wasn't the most effective. And as you said, and as we talked about previously, it's not that they're bad people. They mean well, and everyone's coming to do a really important job, and it's a system that's really overworked. And I think about this note about listed as an allergy. It's like, well, it's not an allergy. The way that the system is set up is most effective to roll with the system by lining this as an allergy. And I think this is one of many moments for us to say, this is an area where the system's actually not serving anybody. It's not serving the people who are providing the treatments, who are there with their whole hearts and trying their best. And it's also a system that's not serving the people who need medical care, whether it's emergency or if it's day to day. And so I'm curious if there are any other reflections that you have from that, beyond our discussions that we've had off of this recording. Yeah.
One of the things that strikes me as well is that Debbie admitted, she was under stress from this reaction and wasn't really understanding what is going on. And that's a high blood pressure. We're all going to agree with that for sure. But how do you advocate for yourself when you might not really be clear-minded? What do we rely on? Now, she had her husband, okay? Do we always have a husband or a spouse or a significant other? Not necessarily does everyone have someone there to accompany them. And so, besides, the medication app, I also have an ID that identifies me as a person with Parkinson's, and to please check in my wallet for this list of meds, because, my phone has password protection, so they can't get in it for that list. But there are things we can do personally, and then we tell our support groups, and we tell our people around us. But But that stress of being in an emergency room, and I used to teach first aid CPR, AED. And one of the things I would start off would be to ask my students, these were college students typically, have you ever seen an EMT or a paramedic run? You might see them walk quickly. Maybe you see them run to go back and get something out of the ambulance. But part of their process of learning and then helping others is to be calm, cool, collected, follow protocol, follow a list. And the list won't change unless something is found to be better through education or through advocacy or through, worse things. So I really, calling Debbie a tiger or me calling her courageous or brave, sincerely, if it's that, if we don't say something, who will? I love being able to advocate for myself and for others in the community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so I think as we're, kind of coming around on this conversation, I'm really curious about, Lorraine, you'd mentioned this app that you use, you have a card. What are some other ways that I think people can take some action if they're feeling inspired by this story to do something in their community to make a mark? What would you recommend for both or either of you?
Oh, Debbie, why don't you start?
Well, I know the route I took.
Mm-hmm.
I say you contact the people who treated you. Say maybe there's another way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really powerful to get people together to advocate with you so that you don't feel like you're alone, and to share the information and bring awareness to what's happening, and to kind of be relentless in making sure that your voice is heard. I think that's incredibly powerful. And then Lorraine, I saw you had something too.
I would just say, there's that old adage, or really, I guess it's a quote from some sport person, but never give up, never ever give up. That concept of just because they're wearing a white coat, or just because this is an event on their turf, let's say, that doesn't mean you still don't have a voice. You have a voice always. And supporting me, the Davis Phinney Foundation, granted, I love Live Well Today and Every Victory Counts. Those are just, every day I hear those in my head, and I love those. But I think it's all about, how do we live well today? Well, we don't want medical mistakes like this. We want to be able to advocate for ourselves and for others. And for me, I'm so grateful that when I heard Debbie's story, that I had kind of accidentally met this person recently, that was the chief medical officer, and then was very comfortable going to him, making an appointment, saying, hey, you need to read this. And his response was, we don't want that to happen here.
Mm-hmm. And so I think there's so many ways that this story can inspire action within different communities, different people with different capacities. If someone's watching this and they say, oh, I don't have the time or the capacity to be Debbie and write a letter and reach out and follow up and find all these people, it could be something such as finding a connection within the medical community and making sure that this story, there's awareness of this story, and knowing that it's not just Debbie, it's so many other people that encounter these challenges, and really challenging the conversation to continue. Because even if you're just a conduit of the conversation and keeping it going, there's going to be somebody who hears it, who has that connection, who can say, I know the medical officer in my community. I want to make sure that this doesn't happen. Or I know something about how to work the system that the hospital uses so that we can make sure people don't have to list an allergy, that there's actually something else that will come up to notice a contradiction. So I think there's so many ways that people can find creative ways to continue the ripple within their communities, because this isn't an issue that is isolated to the hospital where Debbie went. This is something that we see and hear about in so many different communities, and it's an important issue to address. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk about it, and not just flowing with the system that's not serving people. I really appreciate that. So disrupting in the greatest way. Well, before we hop off for today, is there anything else that you would like to add for anyone watching?
I would just like to add that get help. Getting Davis Phinney behind me really helped me. That's what they're there for. They help us. And whether it's a problem with diabetes, visual, there's some group out there that can help.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And Lorraine, any final takeaways?
Well, if I go final takeaway again, my keen interest in healthy Parkinson's communities, because it's all intended, to take down barriers to make sure there's access by everyone, and that access is not just an insurance issue or just a this, that, or other issue, and that the medical community wants to pair up with the committee members or others in the community that are trying to make it a healthy community, not just for Parkinson's, although that's our focus, but anybody with these medical needs. Yeah.
Yeah. And to continue on that plug, I mean, you can't have a healthy Parkinson's community without the baseline of a healthier community in general. And whether that's giving Parkinson's a seat at the table or being the person who brings together a diverse coalition of collaborators to change the system for the betterment of the aging community, including Parkinson's. There's so many different ways to get involved, which is my shameless plug for the Healthy Parkinson's Communities Network. So both Lorraine and Debbie are community action committee leaders. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, oh, there's something that I could do in my community, there's something that needs to happen in my community to make it a better and healthier place for people with Parkinson's to live, whether that's increasing awareness around something like what happened with Debbie, if that's bringing more programs to your community, if that's increasing access, we have ways to support your work and bring you together with people who are like-minded and leading similar journeys in their communities. And so if you'd like to learn more or get involved, you can email us at communities@dpf.org, and we'll happily and quickly get back to you and see how we can support. So thank you both so much for your time. I really appreciate this. This is such a wonderful story to share. So thank you.